the one thing that I want people to know about the Bible is that it wasn't written to transmit facts of all kinds to future generations. The Bible was written to preserve the oral traditions and stories of a particular people that described the truth about the nature of God as they experienced and understood it. Truth and facts are different things. Now, there's some overlap, and we'll look at that in a minute, but I want you to hold that thought that truth and facts are different things. Some of the stories in the Bible predate writing itself by several thousand years, and every single bit of the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, was recorded in a time when a primary source was considered to be a person and not a text. It's only been in the last 400 to 500 years that we became a text-based rather than an oral culture, thanks to the invention of the printing press and improved literacy around the globe. Because we are a text-based culture, and when you went to school, as when I went to school, when we learned to write research papers, we cited not our grandmothers, we cited texts and books. Those are our primary sources now, but that was not always so. But because it is for us, we have become fixated, I think, on the textual details of the Bible in a way that those who originally recorded those stories and accounts were not. The ancient scribes who recorded the traditions that are preserved for us in the Bible were very careful to get it right, but getting it right meant the accurate transmission of truth and not necessarily the accurate transmission of facts. I want you to listen for a minute to an account by the ancient Greek slave Aesop. You may have heard of Aesop's fables, maybe not, but this is one of them. The wind and the sun were disputing which was the stronger. Suddenly they saw a traveler coming down the road, and the sun said, "I see a way to decide our dispute. Whichever of us can cause that traveler to take off his cloak shall be regarded as the stronger. You, wind, begin." So the sun retired behind a cloud, and the wind began to blow as hard as it could upon the traveler. But the harder he blew, the more closely did the traveler wrap his cloak around him, till at last the wind had to give up in despair. Then the sun came out and shone in all his glory upon the traveler, who soon found it too hot to walk with his cloak on. Now, how many of you think that that is a true story? I don't see any hands. How many of you think that that story conveys truth? That is the difference when you're thinking about truth versus fact. And the fact that we conflate them is even seen in my first question. I asked, how many of you thought it's a true story? And everybody assumed truth means fact. When I rephrased it a little bit, oh yeah, there's a whole pile of truth in that story. Today, we often make no distinction between truth and facts, and I think that has left us impoverished, and it's made our stories sterile. It has, in the Bible, I think, left us sometimes unable to even recognize a story. While all facts are true by definition, not all truth is factual. Aesop's story about the sun and the wind is not factual. It never happened, but it conveys a true message nonetheless. And what I want you to know is that happens in the Bible all the time. It happens in the Old Testament and in the New. Sometimes if you know the original languages or can at least have a translation that lets you recognize that certain parts are poetry, is poetry written to us to convey facts? No. So when you can see that it's poetry, that should move us into the truth category instead of in the fact category. Jesus taught truth through fictional stories we've come to call parables, because if we call them fables, people freak out. But that's what a parable is. It's a made-up story to teach truth. The book of Job in the Old Testament begins with the Hebrew equivalent of once upon a time. If you lived in ancient Israel and were reading that, you'd be cued into what kind of story that is by the beginning of the Hebrew text. We lose that in English. I've been in way too many Bible studies that get bogged down in debates, sometimes nasty, heated debates, over whether something is factual. And in the process, the actual truth of the story often gets lost or not touched on at all. I also see this confusion of truth and facts across the whole theological spectrum. People often come to me to try to condemn the Bible and write on our Facebook page and something, this is all just a bunch of myths. And I hate to break it to you, but myth was a key means of transmitting truth for millennia. That's how people transmitted truth for generation after generation after generation, was to code it in these great myths. Read Joseph Campbell if you doubt me. The great myths are designed to get at some truth as it's experienced by a specific people or culture. That's true whether you're talking about the epic creation myths, the Greek and Roman myths, or Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. There's truth in them, they're myths. Those who take the Bible literally and on the more conservative end of the spectrum, on that side, they end up suggesting that if you so much as suggest that even the smallest detail of the Bible isn't factual, then, so you don't believe the Bible is true. No, let's talk about this a little bit more. So I see the mix-up on both sides of that debate. From the more literalist side, we get the insistence that the Bible was meant to teach science and history and social policy, that the Bible has to be factual on all those counts or it's somehow not true, and therefore should take precedence over those facts learned by academic disciplines. And I want you to know that you can believe that the Bible is true in a larger sense. You can believe that God inspired these stories and accounts without having to believe that God was also trying to be your geology professor. The purpose of the Bible is to transmit religious truth, not facts about science or history or anything else. And all of that is not to say that there are no facts that occur in the Bible. On the one hand, you can argue that the whole incarnation of Jesus is truth coming to inhabit fact and coming to live in a specific time in history and a specific place. There are facts in the pages of the Bible. There are historical people and places and events. It's just that the writings were not subject to fact checkers, making sure that nobody skipped a generation in the genealogies, or checking Methuselah's birth certificate to see if he really was 969 years old. The stories were subject instead to truth checkers, who made sure that the tradition they recorded was in keeping with the oral tradition that was passed down through those people charged with keeping the story alive. So that's what I want everybody to know, that it's about truth and not facts.